Hi there, great to see you again. We just finished learning about why UX design is important, an entry-level UX designer's job responsibilities, and how to pursue a career in UX design. Coming up, we have a lot of exciting material to cover. We'll start by introducing you to common UX design terms and frameworks. We'll think about user-centered design and how it's applied. We'll introduce you to popular UX design tools, and we'll learn how UX designers think across platforms, from mobile apps to hardware devices. First, I'd like to share a little about myself. My path to Google wasn't straightforward. I started my career in industries like animation and gaming, and I moved to UX design later. So I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like to learn new skills and enter the world of design for the first time. I love teaching and sharing my knowledge because it allows me to help others overcome hurdles that I myself may have encountered. Good luck as you continue the program. Hi, in this video, we're going to explain user-centered design. Why is it important that designs are centered on the user? Because the user buys and uses your product. In addition, it's also important to solve problems that people actually experience, rather than only trying to solve problems you personally experience. Focusing on real user problems reduces the impact of designer bias. Larry Page, one of Google's founders, highlighted just how important user-centered design is when he said, "There is no substitute for personally watching and listening to real people." At Google, we take this to heart. Larry's statement has morphed into one of Google's core values today: focus on the user and all else will follow. User-centered design puts the user front and center. Focusing on the user means considering their story, emotions, and the insights you've gathered about them. To keep our focus on the user-centered design process has 4 steps: understand, specify, design, and evaluate. Following this framework helps us build products people actually want to use. First, understand how the user experiences the product or similar products. Really understanding the end user requires a lot of research, and we'll talk more about this later. Next, specify the end user's needs. Based on your research, you'll narrow down which end user problem is the most important to solve. Then, design solutions to the end user's problem. This is where you'll come up with ideas for what the product might look like and actually start building the product. And finally, evaluate your design against your end user's needs. Does your design solve the end user's problem? You'll find out here, and you'll also do it by testing your product with real people. It's important to keep in mind that as you go through this process, iteration is key. Iteration means doing something again by building on previous versions and making tweaks. Let's think about an example of user-centered design in the real world. 5 years ago, we launched Google Photos as a place to store photos and keep them organized. Over time, we noticed that users also want to revisit memories and relive treasured moments. To make it easier for users to do this, we used the user-centered design process to redesign Google Photos. Now users can easily search to find their memories. So, now you understand the importance of user-centered design and why designers always keep the user front and center. Up next, we'll check out 2 additional frameworks that are popular among UX designers. See you there.
Hi, nice to see you again. Earlier, we discussed the concept of accessibility. Now, we'll explore the various assistive technologies that can empower anyone with a disability. The term assistive technology, or AT for short, is used to describe any products, equipment, and systems that enhance learning, working, and daily living for people with disabilities. In this video, we'll examine several kinds of assistive technologies, including color modification, voice control, screen readers, and alternative text. Then we'll explore a few design considerations to keep in mind when designing for accessibility. Let's get started. First, It's important to call out that there are lots of people who don't identify as having a disability, but still use assistive technologies. That's because ATs make our lives easier and help provide a better user experience. When we think of assistive technology, we might think of computers, tablets, and smartphones. But AT covers a wide range of devices, like prosthetics, pointing devices, electric wheelchairs, power lifts, eye gaze and head trackers, and a whole lot more. AT can also encompass something as low-tech as a pencil holder. Not only does a pencil holder keep your pencil from rolling away, it also makes pencils easier to grip, which can be essential for people with certain motor disabilities. Understanding how people with disabilities use your product is a critical part of the UX design process. First up, let's examine color modification. Color modification, like high contrast mode or dark mode on a device, increases the contrast of colors on a screen. Black text on a white background or white text on a dark background are both examples of high contrast. High contrast makes the interface easier to see for people with low vision. Color modification also helps anyone who might experience eye strain when viewing screens in the dark or midday when the sun is creating an intense glare. Lots of people use it just because it's easier on the eyes. Next, let's go through voice control and switch devices. Both of these help people with limited dexterity and can serve as an alternative to a keyboard or mouse. Voice control allows users to navigate and interact with the buttons and screens on their devices using only their voice. Lots of devices have settings with this feature. A switch is an assistive technology device that replaces the need to use a computer keyboard or a mouse. Switch devices can allow users to control technology, like a computer or smartphone. There are a lot of different kinds of switch devices, but they all help people with limited motor ability use technology more easily. Next up, screen readers. Screen readers are one of the most common assistive technologies for people with limited vision. The software works on mobile and web devices and reads out loud any on-screen text. Screen readers also read any interactive elements, like buttons, along with non-visible text, like the button names, and any alternative text for images. Alternative text, or alt text, helps translate a visual user interface into a text-based user interface. It essentially uses words to describe any meaningful image for someone who isn't able to see the image. Alt text is also super helpful for those with low bandwidth connections too. If your device is unable to maintain a connection to the internet, it may struggle to load a big file or image. Alt text is useful for context when an image fails to load. As I said before, you don't need to have a disability to benefit from assistive technology. Speech-to-text is a great example. With speech-to-text, a user composes text by speaking into their phone or computer. The voice recording is automatically converted into text. A lot of people find it much easier to text by talking to their device because it offers a hands-free experience and reduces the amount of mental energy needed to type. Let me show you. Here I am using the speech-to-text feature on my mobile device. Pretty cool, huh? There are tons of design considerations to take into account in order to meet the needs of all users. Later, when we build wireframes, we'll go through exactly how to incorporate accessibility into your designs. All right, that's it for now. You've learned the common UX terms and frameworks, what user-centered design means, the tools that UX designers use, and how UX designers work across platforms. Plus, you've gained a deeper understanding of inclusive design and equity-focused design. You practice thinking like a designer, which is a core skill you'll continue to build on throughout this program.
My name is Elise, and I'm the Accessibility and Inclusion Lead for Corporate Engineering. The work we do touches most of Google's products, in that we are creating the internal stuff that helps ensure the products that we create eventually are accessible and inclusive. I love teaching teams that there's value in difference, in the difference that we find within human beings. Difference helps us think creatively and helps us see gaps in our products. Often when we look into those gaps and the insights that we gain from looking at people who experience the world differently, we build better products that are more adaptable, that are longer lasting, and more innovative. When we talk about accessibility, we are talking about how to make a product accessible by people with different abilities. But when we talk about inclusive design, what we're doing is we're looking to difference, to their different experiences and their needs because of their different capabilities, and gathering these insights and applying it in a way that it will benefit everyone, whether they have a disability or not. If we go back in terms of how we used to do websites, they used to be very text heavy. They used to be more like a book. And people with disabilities for years had been advocating for larger text and less content, much more like smaller chunks of text. And when we started to design for accessibility, we created sites that were much more easily consumed. So accessibility is important to me personally because I have a hearing loss, a severe hearing loss. I began losing my hearing at 10, and it progressed over 5 years until it reached the profound range. So if you were to cover your mouth and say 100 words, and I guess that every single one, I might get one right. As someone with a hearing loss, I'm constantly struggling with situations where I need to communicate with others. I use assistive technology in a lot of different ways. Captioning is the most valuable thing for me. I also use things such as Google's Live Transcribe, which helps in real-time conversations with people. I use Google Meet's closed captions to help me understand meetings that I have with my colleagues. There's also something called InnoCaption, which captions telephone calls using a live transcriber. That completely changed my world because before that was created, I couldn't use telephone. And that was something that really blocked my capabilities as in the work setting. The first piece of advice is to consider edge cases or users with difference in all of your product development processes. This is where you're going to gain some really valuable insight. It should be a normal part of your development process. It shouldn't be an add-on. It should be considered from the beginning. But I think it's extremely important to diversify your own network. Start getting to know people who are different from you. Start learning from them. Ask them what their experiences are like with different technology as they go about their world. Learning these unique experiences is what's going to make you see opportunities for great design in your products.
My name is Akhil, and I'm a UX designer at Google. I'm a part of the Next Billion Users team. We design products for users that are coming online for the first time. In my job, I make sure that people can interface seamlessly with technology. So an example of that would be, let's say you want to send your mom a text, and the phone has the capability to send a text. My job is to bridge that gap and make sure that you can tell the phone to send a text to your mom. Now, if done well, you won't be pulling your hair. The strange thing about UX design is that you won't really notice it if it's good design. You only notice it when it's bad. So there's about 1 billion users that are going to come online from countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico. These users have slightly different constraints from users that we typically design for. One of them is that a lot of these users are using low-end devices. So what does that mean? It could mean that they don't have enough storage on their phone, which means they can't install a big enough app. So that's an example of using a low storage device. Sometimes they won't have access to data, or they'll have access to flaky data. So you want to make sure that your app works offline just as well as it works online. Another example could be literacy. A lot of these users aren't literate, or they might not speak English, whereas a lot of the internet is kind of serving people who speak English. So that's another thing to think about. How do we make multilingual interfaces, or how do we make interfaces that don't rely on language at all for someone who can't read? So an interesting example of this could be the music icon. Something as simple as a music icon that we take for granted, the music note, is something that a lot of people don't understand, or they don't know what it means. The reason for that, we think, is because the music icon is a very Western classical music piece of iconography. And since a lot of our users aren't exposed to that, they don't actually know what that icon means. I think when technology is built correctly, it can be a very effective tool. So for things like navigating to a place, or finding a partner, or seeking information, or learning a new skill. I don't think your access to these things should be based on how old or new you are to technology. A lot of our users that are coming online for the first time aren't often confident with technology. And so to not design for them and not help them have access to the internet and to technology, it feels like a great disservice to them.
Hey there, I'm Shabby, an interaction designer here at Google. My role focuses on scaling accessibility across Google's design systems. After high school, I wasn't really sure what kind of career would be a good fit for me. I was interested in technology, but I didn't have any technical knowledge, so I was afraid I wouldn't do well in the field. But eventually, I realized what a huge impact advances in tech had on society and my life. I wanted to harness this power to positively affect the lives of people around me, especially those who tend to be marginalized or forgotten. As an intern in UX design, I worked on products for people with chronic pain. I realized how important and impactful it is to consider the needs of people with disabilities and how much I wanted to create products to help them. So I continued researching and empathizing with those who are disabled to understand how I could uplift them with my work. It's a passion I'm looking forward to sharing with you during this program. So far, you've learned about user-centered design, which concentrates on meeting users' needs. As we mentioned before, there are many UX design frameworks, and those frameworks change over time. In this video, we'll talk about 3 more ways to put the user first in your designs: universal design, inclusive design, and equity-focused design. Let's start from the beginning. When designers began considering how to include an even broader range of people in their designs, they called it universal design. Universal design is the process of creating one product for users with the widest range of abilities and in the widest range of situations. Think of it like a one-size-fits-all approach. Designers propose one solution for everyone. The problem is that when you focus on creating one solution for everyone, the designs lose their effectiveness. It's often difficult to achieve any goals with your product when you have so many intended users. It's like when you go to a store that sells a hat in just one size. The label might read, "One size fits all," but the hat still won't fit a lot of people. Universal design had the same problem. Even though it had the intention of being inclusive, it excluded a lot of people. It turns out one size fits all isn't a great solution. As UX designers realized that universal design didn't meet the needs of every user, the approach to including people began to change. Designers started thinking about the concept of inclusive design, which focuses on finding solutions to meet different needs. Inclusive design means making design choices that take into account personal identifiers like ability, race, economic status, language, age, and gender. Inclusive design includes researchers and designers from traditionally excluded populations in the process, so they can provide their unique perspectives during all phases of the design process. If universal design is a one-size-fits-all solution, then inclusive design can be described as solve for one, extend to many. With inclusive design, you solve for one type of user, and the benefit of that solution can extend to many other types of users. Our goal as designers is to build experiences that are accessible to users with the widest range of abilities. In other words, no one should be excluded from using a product that we built because we didn't consider their needs when building it. In inclusive design, there's no such thing as normal. There's no average person or target audience that we should design for. For example, when designing, we focus on the needs of people who are blind and deaf, even more than we consider the needs of those who rely on their sight and hearing to communicate. Then, as we build more versions of a product, we design for additional excluded groups, like those with physical or cognitive disabilities. Designing products, devices, services, or environments for people with disabilities is called accessibility. Accessibility is just one aspect of inclusive design, and we'll explore accessibility in more detail later. But keep in mind that the idea of solve for one, extend to many only benefits the group the design was created for and existing users. Many groups are still left out. Over time, UX designers realized that inclusive design wasn't always enough. And that's where we find ourselves today, as equity-focused design becomes a new industry goal. Equity-focused design takes the idea of inclusive design one step further. It asks designers to focus on designing for groups that have been historically underrepresented or ignored when building products. The goal of equity-focused design is to uplift groups that have been excluded historically. In order to design with equity as a goal, we first need to know the difference between equality and equity. The two words sound similar, but they're actually two different concepts. Equality means providing the same amount of opportunity and support to all segments of society. In other words, everyone gets the same thing. Equity means providing different levels of opportunity and support for each person in order to achieve fair outcomes. To better understand the difference between equality and equity, check out this illustration. The illustration on the left represents equality because every person gets the same box to stand on. But because each person is a different height, the tallest person has a better view. The illustration on the right represents equity because each person is given what they need. The shortest person is given the tallest stack of boxes to stand on. So, let's explore how this relates to design. Equity-focused design is a newer concept in UX and one that we often discuss at Google. Instead of building products for groups of people who are currently being excluded, which is the goal of inclusive design, equity-focused design seeks to build products that meet the needs of specific individuals and groups who have been excluded in the past. So what does this look like in the real world? Start by identifying a product you want to build. Then, think about the groups that have not been served by this type of product in the past. Finally, build your design while keeping the groups you identified as underrepresented front and center. It's important to keep in mind that equity-focused design doesn't solve all problems, just like inclusive design and universal design don't either. The key point is that these are all different approaches to solving issues of underrepresentation and designing for a more equitable future. These issues are massive, but vitally important. Often, schools and companies consider accessibility, inclusive design, and equity-focused design as methods to consider during the design process, but not as a requirement. But I'm a firm believer that every designer should know the basics of accessibility and why creating products for those who are underrepresented and excluded is a must. As you continue through your career, you'll gain more practice and understanding on how to implement these ideas. We'll get to some more applications of this soon. So we've started discussing designing for accessibility, but as I've said, there's another important factor to being inclusive: equity-focused design. In this video, we'll discuss equity-focused design, specifically as it affects race and gender. But keep in mind that this conversation extends beyond just race and gender to things like ability, age, and socioeconomic status. Let's explore how this applies to the field of UX. Equity-focused design means thinking through all the aspects of a design product and making sure the product is both accessible and fair to all genders, races, and abilities. Plus, the designs need to specifically consider underrepresented and excluded groups. Job applications and census forms are one area where gender and race need specific attention, because they usually involve collecting sensitive data from users. You might have already heard about the importance of having gender-neutral pronouns on these kinds of forms, but that's actually just a starting point. When designing these forms, you should also consider whether a certain question even needs to be included in the first place. Ask yourself why you're collecting this information and whether or not you really need it. For example, a job application probably doesn't need to include a question about gender identity. If a question does need to be on the form, like in a census that's collecting population data, carefully consider the wording and make sure it doesn't have a bias toward what's considered the culturally accepted norm. For example, imagine you have a form that asks respondents to select their gender. One form gives 3 choices: male, female, and other. The second form offers a wide range of choices: male, female, gender nonconforming, non-binary, and a blank field to allow for a written answer. The second form is much more likely to make everyone feel included, and it will also probably do a better job at gathering accurate data. Gender nonconforming means having a gender identity that doesn't conform to a society's gender norms. And non-binary means having a gender identity that's neither entirely male or entirely female. Another example of how equity affects gender is with public restrooms. If a business offers a men's room and a women's room, each with the same number of stalls, that would be an example of equality. However, that's not an equitable design. For one, people identifying as female often need more time, which means the bathrooms are more crowded. Plus, people who identify as gender nonconforming or non-binary are not included at all. Restrooms that are gender neutral, however, are an example of a physical space that's designed to treat everyone equitably. Everyone, no matter their gender identity, has the same opportunity to use each bathroom. Let's review a few ways this has played out in the tech industry. When voice assistants were first introduced at Google, they were trained primarily with male, native English-speaking voices. As a result, the voice assistants could easily understand and respond to male voices, but they had a hard time understanding female voices because of the higher pitch and voices of people with strong accents. When the product launched, users were extremely frustrated when the assistant could not understand them. This example highlights how testing with a diverse set of users can truly improve a product. Another important aspect of designing for equity is using inclusive images. Imagine you're designing an app and you need to create an illustration to use as a mock profile photo when a user hasn't added their own profile photo to their account yet. What does that illustration look like? As a designer, would you automatically create a picture that looks like you? Or would you be more inclusive in your representation? Representing diverse people through icons, illustrations, and photographs requires viewing everything we design through a critical lens. Avatars, like those used in account profiles, should also consider age, race, and gender, among other things. Sometimes, designers consciously include an avatar that specifically challenges the mainstream image of a user for the product to be more inclusive and equitable. Inclusive and equity-focused design are principles with endless implications, and this video is just a starting point for you to build from. As we continue through the program and start discussing user research, we'll explore biases and other factors that impact equity-focused design. Coming up, we'll consider another group of users to design for, the next billion users.
Welcome back. We just finished learning about the advantages of using design tools. Now, we're going to talk about why UX designers need to keep different platforms top of mind as they build user experiences. A platform is the medium that users experience your product on, such as desktop, mobile web, mobile apps, tablets, wearables, TVs, smart displays, and more. It's important to design with multiple platforms in mind because users want a product to look and feel similar no matter what platform they're using. In the past, UX designers could have focused on creating a website only for a desktop computer. But today, users might look at that same website on multiple platforms, like their mobile phone, smartwatch, and TV. UX designers now have to plan for a nearly infinite number of different devices and screen sizes. Even though UX designers need to think across platforms, it's important to focus on one platform first when you build a new product. The platform you select should be the one that best meets your end user's needs. Later, you can design for additional platforms. In addition to having a consistent user experience across platforms, it's also important to have a consistent brand identity. In this case, the brand identity refers to the visual appearance and voice of a company. For example, Google Search should look and feel the same on your desktop computer and mobile phone. It's important to keep in mind that some functionalities only exist within certain platforms. Think about a voice assistant, which allows you to ask questions or control your phone with your voice. Pretty clever, right? At first, only mobile phones had voice assistants. So if the product you were designing required the use of a voice assistant, the only platform it would have worked on was a mobile phone. But fast forward to the present, and voice assistants are integrated into many other platforms, like desktop computers, TVs, and even refrigerators. Today, there are more platforms than ever, which gives us even more opportunities to design features for our users. It's definitely an exciting time to become a UX designer. Next up, we'll dive deeper into designing for web, mobile apps, and mobile web. We've started thinking about designing across platforms. Now, it's time to learn how users engage with different devices. First, we'll discuss user behavior on mobile phones and desktop computers. Then, we'll move on to design considerations when designing for mobile devices. Let's start with an overview of the current landscape. There's a big difference in the amount of time users spend on mobile phones compared to desktop computers. An average mobile session is 72 seconds, while the average desktop session is 150 seconds. More than twice as long. Why is this important? Because it tells us that people use different devices in different ways. Mobile users tend to be goal-oriented, and they're focused on completing a single task. On mobile phones, gestures like tapping and swiping help users move around the screen. Test this out for yourself. Next time you're using a mobile phone, think about your own behaviors. And remember the next billion users we discussed earlier? As those users come online, they're mostly accessing the internet from mobile devices. This means the amount of desktop web traffic compared to mobile web traffic will continue to shift. It's important for UX designers to consider mobile users' connectivity limitations, like slower processing speeds and longer load times. To be inclusive, we need to design for all types of phones, whether they cost $50 or $500. Okay, so users interact with devices in different ways. Now, let's go through the design differences we need to consider based on the devices we're designing for. First, let's talk about responsiveness. In the past, most mobile websites were a mini version of the desktop site, which often made the mobile websites difficult to use. Now, almost all websites use responsive web design. Responsive web design allows a website to change automatically depending on the size of the device. For example, a website homepage might have multiple columns when a user experiences it on a desktop computer. With responsive web design, when a user visits the same website on a mobile phone, the multiple columns are automatically condensed into one column to better fit the smaller screen. All the content is still there, and the usability is way better. Internet browsing on desktop computers has been around for longer than on mobile devices. But since mobile device usage has been booming, designers have had to start focusing on designing for mobile. So let's think about a few best practices when designing for mobile user experiences. First, call to action buttons should be placed front and center, allowing the user to easily complete the desired task, like joining an email list or adding an item to their shopping cart. Second, navigation menus should be short and simple. We want to simplify the user experience on mobile, so menu options should only highlight the core functions of the product. Third, use gestures that users already do, like tapping and swiping. Gestures should be intuitive and familiar to users. Fourth, design for both directions a phone might be held. We need to consider the vertical portrait view of a mobile phone and the horizontal landscape view. We want users to have an effective experience, no matter how they hold their phone. And fifth, reduce visual clutter. Mobile phones have smaller screen sizes, so it's important to keep the visual experience simple. Whew, that was a lot of new information to take in. Remember this main takeaway. Users behave differently depending on their device. UX designers help make that transition happen as seamlessly as possible. It's a big responsibility, but a lot of fun too. Up next, Shabi will be back to talk to you about designing responsively to meet users' needs.